Okay. English. Hello, everyone. This meeting is being recorded and its video will be available online. I'm delighted to welcome Reem Bassiouney in the second conversation in our new series, A Writer, A Vision, A Journey. Reem is an award-winning Egyptian novelist and AUC professor of applied linguistics. Reem is so talented at engaging her audience. I am confident this will be an enriching and warm evening for all. Before we start, I will quickly give a brief history of the website Arablebooks.com for newcomers. My name is Amani. I always loved books. And about 22 years ago, I thought that the internet would be a great opportunity to pay tribute to the writers whose books I enjoy. So I started this website, which is dedicated to enhance understanding between different cultures. And we are proud that over the years, Arablebooks.com has become a destination for researchers and centers of Arab studies around the globe. Our mission is to highlight the ideas, the books, and the women and men who create them. The core of this website has always been the author's bios, their books, as well as their writing, which makes up an e-zine we have online. In 2001, around about 20 years ago, we started two main programs in the website, the Writer's Workshop and the Book Club. In the Book Club, we have featured a book every month, and we published a special file about each author and his or her work. Discussions were conducted online. We actually had
الصوت شوية. ممكن نرفع الصوت شوي.
أكيد. In August 2017, we actually had featured a book by Reem Bassiouney, which was called Love Arab Style. The books were mostly recent releases of fiction and non-fiction. Discussions can be found online in our Book of the Month archive. Lately, as book clubs have become more and more prevalent in the Arab world, we have focused on international literary masterpieces, such as the works of Albert Camus, Günter Grass, Garcia Marquez, all books that offer a window to broaden the Arab reader's horizon. And tonight we present to you the second episode of this new series, A Writer, A Vision, A Journey. This series of in-depth conversations with Arab and international authors aims to explore the motivation, process, and outcomes of a writer's journey, and hopefully shed some light on the values and experiences that are common to writers and readers across the world. I am delighted to welcome Reem Bassiouney, and the discussion will be moderated by Egyptian writer and author Mohammed Tawfiq. I hope you all enjoy this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to very quickly thank Dr. Amani Amin and Dr. Mohammed Tawfiq for this amazing opportunity and for what they are doing for Arab culture. I have to say, I have heard about your initiative long ago, and I thought it's one of the best things that ever happened in Arab culture, Muntada al-Kitab al-Arabi. And I was very honored to participate in it before and today as well. And today is very special because today I'm actually online with you all, and that means a lot to me. It's not just a discussion that we're having on Facebook or Hotmail. So I'm very happy to be with you today.
Thank you very much. We will try to finish this conversation within about 90 minutes. What I propose is to start and having a conversation myself with Dr. Bassiouney, and then we'll open it up to the floor. Questions and comments can be made both in Arabic and in English, but I will request Professor Bassiouney to respond also in English. Unfortunately, Arabic speakers are more likely to understand English than English speakers, but luckily there's more and more interest worldwide in the Arabic language. Let me start first by introducing Professor Bassiouney. Reem Bassiouney was born in Alexandria, Egypt. She obtained her PhD from Oxford University in linguistics. She has previously taught Arabic language and linguistics at universities in the UK and the US, including Cambridge, Oxford, and Utah. She currently works as a series editor for Routledge Studies in Language and Identity, and is chair of the Department of Applied Linguistics at the American University in Cairo. Her academic books include Functions of Code Switching in Egypt, 2006, Arabic Sociolinguistics, with its 2 editions, 2008 and 2020, and Language and Identity in Modern Egypt, which came out in 2014. Her first novel, The Smell of the Sea, رائحة البحر, was published in 2005. In 2007, she published بائع الفستق, The Pistachio Seller. This novel was translated into English and won the King Fahd Center for Middle East and Islamic Studies Translation of Arabic Literature. That was an award that was issued in 2009. Her next novel, الدكتورة هناء, Dr. Hana, won the 2009 Sawiris Foundation Literary Prize for Young Writers. The novel was translated into English, Greek, and Spanish. Bassiouney then wrote الحب على الطريقة العربية, Love Arab Style, followed by her 2010 novel أشياء رائعة, Mortal Designs, interesting translation, which was also translated into English. In 2017, she published her novel The Tour Guide, مرشد سياحي, and then her very successful work, أولاد الناس, ثلاثية المماليك, or Sons of the People, the Mamluk Trilogy, was published in 2018, for which she was awarded the prestigious Naguib Mahfouz Award from Egypt's Supreme Council for Culture in 2020, making her the first woman to win this prize. Her most recent novel, whose title Sabil al-Ghariq, I will later ask the author to translate into English, was released only a couple of months ago. Well, let me start first of all this conversation by asking you what motivates you to write? At what point in your life did you say, I'm a writer, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life?
That's a good question. I think I decided that I'm a writer when I was 12 years old. I remember the moment very well. I wanted to become both a fiction writer and a journalist at that point in time. When I was 12 years old, I wrote my first novel, and it was called something like Making or Speed of Time, or it was a very complicated title as I remember it. And it was a very serious, sort of morbid theme. And I think after that, I came out of that kind of writing, thank God. But I think at that point in time, I really decided this is what I wanted to do. And since then, I have been trying to reach that aim by reading a lot, but also studying at university. I studied literature, and this helped a lot. Of course, analyzing literature is very important for an author. And so I kept writing throughout my life, but I actually didn't publish until 2005. By that time, I was 32 years old. So I didn't dare publish until that time. So my first novel, The Smell of the Sea, was published in 2005. And I think I still have so many short novels in my drawer, long novels in my drawer that I didn't get out. And I don't know exactly at what moment does a writer realize that this is the right time to start publishing or to start getting his work exposed to others. But it just happened to me at that particular moment in my life. I also stopped writing for 7 years. And at that point in time, I think I did have a writer's block, and I thought that that would be it. I already finished what I want to do. After the novel Mortal Designs or Wonderful Things in 2010, I stopped writing for 7 years. And I really thought that, because I believe that writing is an inspiration. And if one doesn't have the inspiration to write, then one shouldn't really, no matter how much one studies writing, it is a kind of compelling feeling to write. So I decided that since I don't have that feeling for these 7 years, perhaps I my inspiration is over. But thank God, then I started writing again, and I wrote 3 novels after that. So that was sort of short life story. Oh, we can't hear you. Can,
I'm sorry. I was muted. I'm sorry.
No problem.
This was a very good introduction to your writing, which we'll continue to explore. But let me ask you first a question about your day job, your academic career, linguistics. What interests you in the linguistics, and how does that affect your literary career? And what does language mean to you?
Sure. I mean, that's really important, because what I specialize in, as this book shows, is basically sociolinguistics. And sociolinguistics is the relationship between language and society, the relationship between identity, history, and individuals. And so, as you could see, it's a very actually relevant and useful field for novelists, in my opinion. So I was really lucky that I studied linguistics. I remember when I actually was told by my university that I have to do linguistics, otherwise I will not get appointed at the university, I cried, because I so much wanted to do poetry at that point in time. And so when they told me, no, if you would like to continue appointed at the university, you need to do your PhD in linguistics. So I remember I went back home and cried, because at that point in time I didn't understand what's important about linguistics. And so when I went to Oxford, I decided that what I really want to do was sociolinguistics. That's not how I started. And sociolinguistics really touched my heart, and I was taught a lot by studying sociolinguistics, because it's all about the relationship between an individual and society, as I said, between language and identity. And so parallel to my novels, there was also my academic books. So when I was writing, for example, my Arabic sociolinguistics book, I wrote my novel, Love Arab Style. And that's because I learned so much about the Arab world historically, about the differences between Shias and Sunnis, for example, that I didn't have any idea about. A lot of Egyptians do not necessarily know so much about this history. But these are things that I didn't really know about until I studied linguistics and started to look at the impact that language makes on conflicts, on individuals, and on communities, and on politics as well. And so that's how somehow it's intertwined with my writing. And the same with my book, Language and Identity in Modern Egypt, because it's all about identity issues with Egyptians. And I think it did influence very much my novel, Sabil al-Gharq, my last novel. And it's very difficult to translate the title, as Ambassador Mohammed was just saying. We actually started on Facebook to think about how to translate it, and we didn't come up with any good translation yet. So I will need your help with that. So that was, that's how I think my my academic work really somehow was very useful for my work as a novelist. And they complemented each other very much. I never felt that what I was doing as a novelist was against what I was doing as an academic. In fact, I think especially for my historical novels, being an academic helped me a lot in my writing, because it was easy for me to find reliable references. I was used to the idea of trying to deduce information quickly from references. And this all would not have been possible have I not been trained in doing research before. So I think it was actually very helpful and very useful. Having said that, there are moments when, for example, I'm supposed to be working on my research, but I spend this time doing something else that is related to my novel. So there is a little bit of competition between both careers, in the sense that I always had to balance, and my writing always somehow wins. So if I have something to write about, I forget everything else and I'm only writing. So
That's lucky for us.
thank you so much.
That's lucky for us. So where do your ideas come from? How do you decide what to write about? And when you actually decide choose a theme, how do the ideas flow? How does that work with you? And how do you reflect your different moods in your writing? How do you manage to keep the tone under control of your writing?
Okay. I think my ideas usually come from different places. It could be that I met a person that is very impressive or very unique, and somehow this person's personality I took note of in my mind, in my unconscious mind, and then at one point this came out. Like, I think it was like this with Professor Hannah, for example. With another Professor Hannah, I think I met a couple of characters that were similar, that really were very impressive, and I thought this is a character that one has to write about. It could also be that I was fascinated by a place, and this happened with the Mosque of Sultan Hassan in Cairo, where when I visited the mosque for the first time in the year 2013, I didn't know very much about the Mamluk history at all, and I didn't know very much about Sultan Hassan himself. I was so impressed by the sheer, how big and how tremendous the building is, that I decided that I really need to understand a little bit more. And this took me into a journey of 3 years of studying the history, reading articles and references in English and in Arabic, and sometimes translated from French and Italian, and trying to understand more about the history of the place. So sometimes it could be a person that I met, it could just be a place that I visited, or it could be an idea that has been in my mind for a very long time, and it just had to come out at this specific moment.
You mentioned place. You mentioned, of course, Sultan Hassan, and that's evident, of course, in your work. Your place plays an important role. It has a function in your work, in almost all your work, actually. Even in the last novel, which we will come to talk about a little bit later. So place is an important issue. So how does this? How is that related to the fact that you've lived in different places? You haven't always been living at the same in Egypt, for example. You've moved around in different places, and how does this reflect in your work?
I think I was again thinking that I was unlucky, but now I think I was lucky that I studied abroad, because once you start living abroad, then issues of identity become really pressing and very important to deal with. Issues that have to do with whether you think of yourself as only Egyptian, whether you think of yourself as Arab, whether you think of yourself as Mediterranean. I mean, I come from Alexandria. Even being Alexandrian is already an important part of my identity, as different from being from Cairo. So there were so many issues that I had to grapple with as a young student, a graduate student living abroad by myself for the first time ever. And it was a journey that I couldn't really write about yet. And at that point in time, that's the first time that I started to think about writing in English, and failed miserably because I couldn't really write fiction in English, unlike you. You're very successful doing that, so I really envy you this. I can write academic books in English, but I can only write fiction in Arabic. I think it was just very challenging for me to be able to express my feelings in English. It was much easier to write my academic books in English, but the opposite, writing novels in English was not really possible. But I think places mean a lot to me. And places is perhaps also in linguistics part of how you define yourself. So we have a big section in linguistics related to location and how location influences the way that you think of your identity and your language. And so I think you're right. In all my novels, a place plays a very important role. That's true. That's true.
You have touched upon the issue of identity, and of course that's a very interesting issue. That's a very broad issue, and very important these days. It has been noted then that your writing that was written when you were abroad is mostly focused on the present.
Sure.
It has themes that are related to current affairs. Whereas the writing that you've been writing since you've come back to Egypt has been more about exploring history, different periods in history. And is that part of your search for identity? Is that part for looking for your roots? How do you explain that?
I thought about this myself for a long time. why is this happening? Why did I start writing about history? And my interpretation, which could be wrong, is that I started writing history when I was 16 years old. Actually, I wrote a historical novel that I never finished, and it was about Tariq ibn Ziyad, and it's about the conquest of Spain. And I actually I almost finished the novel. There was a very short part that I didn't finish, and I just put it aside and forgot about writing historical fiction anymore. But I remember it took me 3 or 4 years to decide to put it aside and forget about it. I kept searching, and I kept looking for references about this person for a long time. So it seems like perhaps coming back to Egypt, I'm beginning to understand parts of my identity that I somehow kept hidden for a long time, which is my love for history. I think I just had, as the novel Sabil Gharak was saying, we keep discovering ourselves as we go along, and it needs time, and we need to find the right time, and we have to be at the right age to be able to understand certain aspects that we will never be able to understand when we were younger. So I think at that point in time, perhaps it was the right time for me to go back into my love of history and go and dig deeper into Egyptian history. Before that period, for example, I didn't know very much about the Mamluk period. And what I knew about it was exactly what we took at school. I had a very negative idea about the Mamluks, which turned out not to be exactly true. And so, I think it had to do with finding this part of my identity at that stage of my life.
You mentioned your latest novel, Sabil al-Gharq, which I will venture to translate, probably not a very good translation, but I will venture to translate for the benefit of those who listen to this conversation and are not Arabic speakers. I would venture to call it the path of the drowned man. And
Okay.
Of course, there's a play of words, because on the one hand, the path, which is a path, but at the same time, it's a sabil, which is a place where travelers in historical periods used to stay for free and get free lodging and food and so on. And the drowned man itself is also a play on words, because you can be drowned physically, as in a naval battle, or you can be drowned in knowledge, or you can be drowned in madness, or you can be drowned in a spiritual understanding of the world that others don't understand and consider you to be mad. And of course, the name is the name of a place, an actual place in Cairo. So you mentioned that, and what I have noticed is that most of your writing, if not all of your writing, was focused more on the story, not on style, not on writing techniques and so on, but focused on the story in a simple, straightforward way. Now, in Sabil al-Gharq, for the first time, we see that has changed. We see a lot of technique in that story. So, is that an evolution in your artistic perception, your artistic sensitivity, or is it, on the other hand, the subject matter that really forced this on your vision?
Okay, that's a very good question. I think I would say it's the subject matter, because it was very challenging for me to, as you said, it's not an easy read, isn't it? It's not and I intentionally always wanted my writing to be not necessarily only straightforward, but easy to read, even if the ideas are deep, so people could actually read easily and as you said, focus on the story, but then try to somehow digest the ideas if there are any complicated ideas. But with this one, the subject matter and the idea of relating 3 different events in history in this way was very challenging for me, to the extent that perhaps I should tell you this, I don't usually say it, but you're a writer, so you understand what I'm talking about. I actually wrote part of this novel. I actually wrote the historical part that happened in 1508. The whole story. I wrote it and then I put it aside, and then started writing the story of 1882. And then referred only in passing to what happened in 1508. And that was a very difficult technique in narration. And as you said, I usually don't do that, but this specific novel with the subject matter and this relationship that is very clear between a historical incident in 1508 and a historical incident of 1882, it was very important to be able to focus on both together. Having said that, I always found it sometimes disturbing when I read authors that would go forth and then go back and forth, between present and then past. And sometimes I was lost, or sometimes I would just pass the pages and go back to the main story. And so I was telling myself, it's almost like an irony that I have to do this now. But I tried to do it in such a way that it doesn't necessarily confuse the reader, and it's not too boring for the reader, and it's not too long. And that's why the part that I actually wrote that was about 40-50 pages, I completely ignored and rewrote in about 7 or 8 pages. So I think that's the first time that this happens to me. I don't know whether this is a kind of precedent that it will change the way I write, or whether it's just a one-off. I'm not sure yet.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Sure.
Okay. Well, I mean, you have touched. First of all, I don't think the novel is hard to read or difficult to understand. But as you have mentioned, the subject matter is quite elaborate. This is a quite a complex structure. It's probably a much more ambitious work than any of your earlier works, including Awlad al-Nas. So if you look at it, it raises both feminist and class issues. It discusses modernity and traditional values. It mixes folk tales with politics and history. Even throughout the novel, there's a strong Sufi thread, and actually even a hint of reincarnation. So it's if you look at the it's quite a lot of quite a lot of substance in there. And if you look at the ending exposes all this, because at the ending you actually have three separate endings. The first ending ends the dramatic evolution and the story. The second ending ends the Sufi part. And then the third ending is more of a political, historical, nationalist discourse. So you have, it's quite a complex structure. But the question that comes to my mind is, all these elements, how are they related in the psyche of Reem Bassiouney? How does all this figure out in you?
Sure. Yeah, this is difficult. I think we also learned in my academic work that everything is political. Language is political. Identity is political. History is political. Everything that we learn in our life is political. And we, again, learned in my sociolinguistics that no one has equal access to resources. So that has to do with the class part. And that's also political. It's just because there are more people who are more powerful than others. There are nations that are more powerful than others. And so that will lead to this kind of inequality in the world that I think is very important to try to reflect in my novels. The theme of Sabil Gharik, as exactly like Muhammad is saying now, there are different themes, and some of them are very shocking for readers, especially the theme of the slave boy and his relationship to his master, the girl that he works for. And I had a lot of people in Egypt tell me that they could not accept this relationship. They could not really accept that this could be a real marriage. And what this does, and I think I did the same thing in Wonderful Things, as you remember, because I know that you read all my work, and the same with Dr. Amani, is that I am somehow trying to force all of us to, try to look at our prejudices and see whether they are founded or whether they are not founded. How do we look at ourselves? How do we face the things that we take for granted? And I think that's exactly what the novel was trying to do. And this is exactly what I did also in Wonderful Things, with this girl coming from the countryside and how she was somehow abused and mistreated by people who are thinking of themselves as being much more powerful and upper class in Egypt. So there was the theme of inequality that is not only related to a special community, but related to nations. So at a time when Egyptians might be oppressing each other because of class or because of slavery, there was also the nation that was oppressing Egyptians because of what they wanted from them. So it was all very much related. At a time when there was so much oppression, there was also opportunity, where we found that women were struggling for education, very early struggle of women for education. And it was a struggle that was led by women, and it was for women. So later on, as the novel is showing, we have the first person who was trying to, get accepted being at a school in Egypt, at a public school in Egypt, and she was not accepted because it was a shame for a girl to go to a school. And everyone was harassing and bullying her because she was just going to a school in 1876, for example. And then we find this kind of struggle. She's putting up with this bullying all her life, but then she fails to be able to, bring other Egyptian girls to go to school. But then someone else picks the thread. Another woman, Naboya Musa, in history, after 20 years, picks the thread. And then she's taking over the banner of educating women, being the first woman who takes the elementary school education. And she also gets very much bullied. Again, we never taught this in history, but it was a struggle of women. And it was basically, again, going back to this idea of unequal access to resources and the idea of tyranny. So we have people trying to pressurize and oppress these women who would like to have education. because of political reasons and because of class reasons. And then we have these women struggling for their own independent freedom at the same time that the slave boy is struggling for his freedom, at the same time that the nation is struggling for its freedom. So that's how they were all in my mind somehow related.
Thank you, thank you. That's a brilliant, explanation. But allow me to explore it a little bit further. Your writing, as you have mentioned, is sometimes quite deceptive. It seems to be very tame at the beginning, and then gradually it becomes more and more brutal. Sometimes you actually have quite brutal scenes. In this particular novel, you have some scenes that are, you have scenes of torture, you have scenes that are sexually explicit, you have quite a lot of brutal scenes. And you mentioned that the relationships themselves are difficult for society to accept, even today, more than a century, maybe 130 years later. So you mentioned all that. So how does, I mean, this raises the whole issue of inhibitions. As a writer, and particularly as a woman writer, where are your inhibitions? How do you deal with your inhibitions? When you write, are you completely free? Are you worried about how people will receive this? Do you self-censor? Do you say, I'm going to write whatever I want, I don't care? How do you manage that?
I think I don't necessarily have any inhibitions, to be honest. I just write what I really want to write. That's why some, as you said, some scenes are actually violent, and there are. So I just write what I actually feel like writing. Having said that, I also think that authors should be able to write in such a subtle way that even a scene that is very sexually explicit or a scene that is very violent does not necessarily have to use the word straightforward words for description, but they could be describing things in a very vivid, subtle way that is even more interesting for the reader than just explicitly saying what is happening without the feeling part. So I always try to concentrate on the feelings of the people and how they are dealing with the situations, whether it's torture, whether it's love, whatever it is, the conflicting feelings of humans. I think that's very important.
One last question, because I really want to open up the discussion. You've traveled, you've lived abroad, and you have a sort of global vision. How do you place Egyptian writing, Egyptian literature on the global perspective? And the second question is, how do you place your own writing within the context of Egyptian writing?
Oh, that's a tough one. I don't know globally. I think we have very good writers in Egypt. We have a lot of young writers that are doing a great job, very promising. I can't see how Arab writers could have an impact globally at the moment. Same way, unfortunately, as I can't see how we as linguists, we struggle to make an impact globally. It's very tough. It's very difficult. And this has to do with unequal access to resources. It's the same idea once more. It's just because, if I want to publish, or if I go to a conference and present about Arabic sociolinguistics, then you might get 3 or 4 people interested. But then if you're presenting about anything that is about a dialect in the US that is not spoken except by 30 people, you might get 300 people interested. So there is this kind of, although the Arab world is quite 300 million at least, there is still this kind of lack of interest in understanding a little bit more about the society and the language and the people. So I still cannot see a place for Arab literature globally. And that's a pity. So I would very much want this to change, but I think in order for this to change, we also need to choose for translation novels that deal with the everyday as you said, the situations that are look as if they are very mundane and realistic, but they are much more complex. We need to change what we are looking for in translation. We should not be looking for the exotic as much as we are looking to find the shared humanity within us. That is something that perhaps the people outside will be able to sympathize with. Sometimes a love story is everything you need, because then you can say, oh, but I have gone through these feelings, although I come from a completely different culture background, or even a story of revenge, or a story of bitterness, or a story of despair, things like humans all feel. And once you can actually, and I think that's what made Naguib Mahfouz also a great writer, because although he was writing about this very local area, he was not local. The way that he was describing feelings was not local. So I think that's what's important in a way.
Well, thank you for that. I think we have had a good preliminary comments. I think that would be enough to start a good discussion. We can comments can be made either in English or in Arabic, or if you prefer, you can send them through the chat function, and I will ask you to respond in English if you can. Yes. So the floor is open. Any comments or questions? I have a few things on the chat.
I can see Sylvia has a question.
Sylvia, go ahead, Sylvia.
Sorry, I came in late. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, we can hear you.
I came in late. I'm very sorry. I apologize for that. I had fallen asleep. Interesting to hear about the translations, because there is a magazine called World Literature Today, and they have regularly, they've just had an issue on translators and on translations. And it's a wonderful magazine that I'm sure if you can get the translations into English together, that they would look a lot more at writing from in Arabic, or originally in Arabic, from Egypt or other countries. There's also a website run by a gentleman called Melvin Alm, who reads a lot of short stories. And what he likes to do is to bring short story writers from different countries, but there always has to be a story available readily on the web that he can use as an example. And that I mentioned to him about, do you have any Egyptian short stories? And he was saying, no. And I said, well, how about we get some together? And this might be a way of, because he has a big audience, and he only focuses on, it's called The Reading Life, his blog. It's very simple, but it's very well followed. And so I thought that might be something, some way you were mentioning of getting out there a little bit more in translation, of course. But there are these two places. I'm sure there are others. There's also, I think, a press in the UK that only deals with works in translation. And yeah, I'll try and make a list and send them to Mohammed perhaps later. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That would be very useful, actually. That would be very useful for all of us. Thank you so much, Sylvia.
And well, it's World Literature Today. The website is worldliteraturettoday.org. So you can, they're online, and they have bits that they put online, and they have a print copy 4 times a year. Very, very nice quality stuff. And the other one is The Reading Life. Mel Alm is the name of the person. But the other thing that I wanted to, you mentioned about your question of self-censoring or writing whatever you like, and being brave, and sometimes it's difficult, because you don't know who your reader is and whether the reader is going to understand, or I think it's very brave to just go out there and do that, because that's what I try and do. But I'm an old lady. I can do what I like. You're young. You probably have some sort of, you have to be careful with your publisher or things like that. So how do you work around that? You said you don't think about who is at the other end, but sometimes you have to, because the publisher wants certain things, doesn't want certain things, doesn't like certain things. And how do you deal with that?
I haven't yet had this problem, thank God. And that's, but I can see, I remember once there was someone who was underlining, and it happened to me in the past, that was underlining all the scenes, the love scenes. And they were saying like whether I should take them out. And I said, no, I'm not taking them out. So they were okay with that. But I think I remember they marked them. So there was someone marking the scenes. But this happened to me about 6-7 years ago, but it didn't happen again, thank God. So I'm not that young, perhaps that's the reason.
Well, thank you for that.
Thank you, Sylvie.
I think Hoda has something. Hoda has a comment to make.
Yes, I may. Hi, hi, Reem.
Hi, Hoda, how are you?
Fine, thank you. I came in a little late, so I'm not sure if that question was raised before. So please stop me if you think it's raised before. Because you're interested in linguistics, and because, as I told you last time we met, your language style is, or actually your sentences are well edited, well written. Is it part of what you believe would be the mission of writing, of your writing in particular, would be somehow to maintain some strength to the Arabic language for us, the Arabic speakers? Because you do the two things. You write well written sentences, but they are modern, or the but here is not a negative. I mean, they're not old, they're not metaphorical or so on and so forth. They're simple sentences, but they maintain proper language style and good language style. How much would you want to put your interest and your field of linguistics in your writing, so that language would be part of the mission, what you want to achieve, improving our language?
Okay, that's a big question. To be honest with you, when I write in Arabic, my style is easy to read, isn't it, Hoda? It's not very,
Yes.
It's not difficult
Yes.
at all, is it?
Yes, as I'm telling you, your sentences, as I told you, my editing mind is always working, and I always think of better formats for the better ways of writing the sentence. But I don't get that in your language. I'm always, okay, so she thought about it and she chose the one that achieves the purpose. And yet, because your latest novels are historical, some people would have chosen to write, very high style, very old style, but you didn't. You chose very modern, simple, short sentences, simplified structure that, as I understand now, you are even the structure of the novel itself is for people to, for regular readers to feel comfortable reading it. So maybe the language, but because you raised the idea of sociolinguistics, the idea of people, reaching people, people read novels nowadays, Egyptians at least. So, but they don't know Arabic that well. So how much would you want to be effective in that, in improving our regular ability to use the language, if I may say?
Sure, and I think perhaps we have to go back to linguistics in the sense that the way we were taught Arabic at schools, I don't know, Hoda, I feel like I'm older than you, so possibly perhaps the way that you were taught Arabic was better, but the way I was taught Arabic in schools, it was a kind of, language that you fear. It was tough. The poetry was difficult to understand. There was always the kind of fear, phobia from Arabic. And it took me some time to break that. It took me actually some time. As I said, we keep learning about ourselves. So it took me years that I decided over these years, I said, I will never, ever read, for example, Sha'ar Jahili, or I will never, ever read Umayyad poetry or Abbasid poetry. These are things I'm not going to be interested in. And then suddenly I found myself going back and reading these things that I was not interested in, and starting to understand them and finding that they were written in sometimes very straightforward Arabic. The poems that were memorable were written in very straightforward Arabic. It's sometimes the poems that were not memorable that we take at school. The choices of poems are not necessarily the ones that are the best. But the very kind of straightforward, direct way of writing is very old in Arabic, and it's very important. And I think, in my opinion, also as a linguist, we were taught that you always have to be a minimalist. Yes. Basically, exactly what you said. You have to write exactly. You have to write everything you want in a clear way and with the minimal effort of people reading. So it's not a very useful thing if you read 5 sentences that an author wrote and you can't understand what this person means.
Actually, actually, one of my measures when I say a good sentence or a bad sentence is a sentence that once you've reached the end of it, you'd have to go back to the beginning in order to understand it. So that was what she wanted to use or say. But my question, Reem, is do you think that novel reading could be a way to improve our relation to our language?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I did get some people said to me, we never read Arabic novels, and your novel was the first one we read in Arabic, for example. This makes me very happy. Yes, I think good novels or interesting novels are a very good way for people to start reading in Arabic. Because basically, again, because we have to go back to the theme that Arabic should not be a punishment, it should be a pleasure. It should, because we were, even in movies, we keep taking standard Arabic specifically as if it's something like a chore. It's a subject at school that we don't necessarily want to study.
Grammar is a lot to take.
See, it's we always. But if we're reading interesting, sure. Yeah, if we're reading interesting novels, then we find, wow, this language is so nice and it's so direct and it's so impressive, and we can express ourselves better. So this is important. We need to change our attitude towards the language as well.
Is that part of your what's on your mind when you're writing? What's on your mind when you're writing, when you're choosing the language, or are you choosing the language for the literary purposes only?
I think it's just this is how I write it. I don't have it in mind whether people will learn from it. No, I don't have that. But it's good that if it does, then it's good. But I usually just write whatever I have, whatever comes to my mind.
Well, I hope people are quoting you again and again, so I hope that improves. Yeah, they are quoting. You have good sentences that have a lot of as you're saying, human feeling, human emotions that people are attached to, and so they like to quote it and repeat it and memorize it.
I have two raised hands, Dr. Saeed, and then our friend Bashair. So, Dr. Saeed, please, you can you have the floor. If you can unmute first, please. Can you unmute?
Well, yes, I am already. Thank you very much for inviting really to attend this very thought-provoking, session. And really, I enjoyed listening to Reem Bassiouney and yourself.
Thank you.
And this all the very, very, very important topics you discussed. Really. And I cannot resist commenting on the last, bit, about Arabic language teaching, because, I am a qualified, Arabic teacher. I practiced this for a while, and I'm still teaching it. And I completely and strongly and aggressively agree, with what you said. And recently, actually, I used novel of some writers to teach Arabic through it. And actually, I found, it's very encouraging to all students. And they said, really, now we can learn Arabic in a different way, not, from Sibawayh and Niftawayh and Akhfash and all these kind of, things we talked before. Okay, I think, they played, good part in the history, but now we need to move on. And the language now need to be taught in a different kind of, context. So there are a lot of, wonderful material outside there. Unfortunately, the choice is not good, as you said, and I still agree, that, really, even novel can be, used, to teach Arabic, but they need, the selection need to be good. Anyway, apart from that, I would like, really to comment and ask about, a number of issues raised now. You mentioned, the motive of going back to history. And I feel like as Arabs, we are divided into two parts. One part believe that going back to the history to rewrite it is very important, so we can, really understand it better and, use it better for like a present time and future also. But another part, another, camp believes that no, just ignore history and just be like towards future. Think about future and just move on and let's forget about it. So I wanted to understand where is Reem Bassiouney in the two camps, whether you need to go back to reconfigure the history, reread it and rewrite it, so people next generation can understand history better, and there are a lot of lessons to be learned, okay, for the present time and future also from the history. Or we need just really to abandon it altogether and move forward, okay, to the future, and we have nothing to do there. This is one question. The second thing is you talked about multiculturalism, okay, and I wanted to understand the relationship between multiculturalism and the multiple identities. Okay, this is something also that really a line that we need to follow. And we shouldn't have one identity, and people need them to have multiple identity, or is this something that really have a different position there? And very interesting, point you raised about politics. And myself, I served a little bit in UNESCO, and I was engaged in politics to some extent. I didn't like the environment. I'm not that kind of guy, but I don't know, whether I read, what you said correctly or am I mistaken about, are we going back, to single factor theory? Okay, we had, this نظرية أحادية العامل. Okay, that, for example, German people, believed that, really everything is about, the German, race, for example. Okay, are we saying now is, politics to be blamed for everything? Okay, or I'm not getting it right there, because you mentioned that, politics in everything, in there. So I just, it's a question I thought maybe to get some elaboration from you about that. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you, Dr. Saeed. Thank you so much. I think with the question of history, it's very important, and we, all of us, including all countries in the Arab world, did not necessarily deal with our history thoroughly. I know for Egypt, for sure we didn't. And I know in Oman, when I went, the history was incredibly rich that I felt I really want to keep reading about it. And Arwa, thankfully, sent me some books that I'm still reading now and saving for my break to read and discover how fascinating and how little I actually knew about the history of that place. So I think in order to understand ourselves, we do need to go back to our history. Unfortunately, sometimes periods in history are erased completely from our memory, and that doesn't help. It doesn't make us better, and it doesn't necessarily make us realize who we really are. It's very important for identity issues that we are aware of all our history. As the novel Awlad al-Nas, Sons of the People says, we need to embrace our history, the good and bad parts of it, and learn from it. because history keeps repeating itself. You know, whenever if we read about history, we say, wow, it's as if we're talking about our present. And that's because history keeps repeating itself. I wouldn't blame politics for everything, but I think in a way, everything is political in the sense that everything has to do with a decision that people take to compromise, or that people take to prefer themselves or favor a group over another group. But I think politics is one part of, or a component in this game that is being played all over the world. But social class is one in Egypt, for example. I think perhaps in Oman is more tribal affiliation, but in Egypt, social class plays a very crucial role. It's language, it's the dialect that you speak. I mean, I come from Alexandria, and even just pronouncing vowels in a different way, people make fun of me in Cairo. So today I can complain about that. And I haven't changed the way I speak. I don't know whether it's because I'm not capable of, or whether it's an identity issue. I can't make up my mind yet. But there are certain, certain things about the way that you speak, about your location, about your history that are very much related. And so about your political background and affiliation, because your political background will also influence how you read history and how you relate to your location, especially in certain parts of the Arab world, not necessarily all over the Arab world.
Okay. We have a hand raised from Bashair.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm very glad that I'm here with you today. So you talked about inspiration. The thing is, I heard a phrase, they said, it's in writing, 99% hardworking and 1% is a talent. But sometimes I feel we rely a lot in inspiration. So if we had a deadline and we have to write something, but we cannot wait the inspiration to come to us. So what we can do in this situation? Another question, sometimes we have the idea and we have the whole idea in our mind, but somehow we cannot write it the way that we the way that we wish. So we keep adjust the idea, but we still feeling that it's not that good. So what do you do usually in this situation? That's it.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so I think that with inspiration, and this is my personal opinion, by the way, I think each writer has their own way of looking at things. Some writers have a specific time where they write every day, and this is their way of doing things. Some writers decide that they only write when they want to, and then they write all day long. And so it's really it's a very personal thing. So I wouldn't think there's any rule for it. I personally think that you need a lot of work. You need a lot of discipline to be a writer. It is hard work. It's a lot of thinking, and it's a lot of discipline. You really have to discipline yourself to sit down and write. And this is true. But without an inspiration, you can do that and it doesn't mean anything, in my opinion. Again, this is a personal opinion. And inspiration is something that a reader will be able to feel. They will feel that there is something living in what you're writing. There is something touching in what you're writing. So an inspiration is very important. But an inspiration without a lot of reading and a lot of discipline and a lot of studying and a lot of thinking and preparation will also not mean very much. So I think they all go hand in hand. Concerning the idea of if you write and then you feel that your writing is not necessarily what you want, this is very tricky, because I always advise people when they write first time, not necessarily to show it to other writers. Not especially only because people could criticize you, and then you decide not to write ever because you're being criticized. And we always say that if you're writing something, it's like a little baby that is very weak, and you really do not want to make the baby go out in bad weather. So you just have to somehow protect your little child by being confident and just going ahead and publishing what you write and seeing whether people will accept it or not. Even if they don't, and you're convinced that it's good, so what? I mean, writing should first and foremost make you feel good, or you feel that you have to do it, but you should not be writing for other people. So it's a very personal journey. It's a very lonely process. So, and this is, I mean, again, this is my opinion, but I think everyone has his own or her own way of looking at writing. I know that Muhammad only writes when he feels an inspiration, isn't it, or not?
Which is,
I feel
very rare.
I think that's why I was saying we're waiting for we're waiting for the new work.
Great. Now we have, I have first of all a question through the chat from Dr. Zaid, then we have Dr. Arwar, then Dr. Omneya. Dr. Zaid mentions that he gets the feeling that you have, your writing has a project which is more a historical project in search of identity. Do you have any comments on that?
Yes, I think that at the moment I do have a project in mind. I don't think I will be doing it for the rest of my life, but I think I might still do it for a couple more years, perhaps, until I feel that I delivered what I really want to, you know, because yes, I do feel that there are certain parts of history that are very blurred, that are not very clear, that are extremely relevant and important for us to understand.
Okay. Would you like to follow that up, Dr. Zaid?
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you, Ambassador, for giving us all this great chance to speak to a talented novelist like
thank you,
Mrs. Reem Bassiouney. Now I'm thinking history is your main context. For writers, it is rich, it is obscure, it brings many interpretations to our understanding, to politics, religions, identities. It's related to our common memory. Almost all our main Arab writers were inspired by history. They wrote about history. But at the same time, history, it's also about taboos. And breaking the taboos is among, I guess, is among your main interests. I found that in your distinguished language in Awlad al-Nas. And I feel that some taboos are not yet broken the way you want them to be. This is in addition to what I mentioned before about the importance of getting your novels into a broader project, which is what you're doing and what you are confirming now. It's a project. So it's a project not about history, about identity. So speaking about that, and my point is, as a linguistic, what are the main taboos that you find in our Arabic language when dealing with identities and in an artistic way?
Can you explain a little bit, like give me an example of what you would think about?
Yes, I mean by that, when you mentioned, when Ambassador Tawfiq mentioned the inhibition, the taboos, the writing about love scenes, I felt I was under the impression that you were self-censoring yourself. Although I adore the love scenes in Awlad al-Nas, but I felt that you wanted to say more, and that things were not that easy. So returning back to our poems, our Arab poems were much more explicit, and I don't mean by explicit, I don't mean by naming things by their names, but sometimes going deeper. You were very, let's say, using great, this is why I said distinguished language, to put me as a reader under this great impression of love scenes, but I had this feeling that you were not at your ease. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe.
So I understand.
Maybe I wanted more. Maybe as a reader, I wanted to go deeper and deeper. Maybe this is my mistake as a reader. That's it.
Sure. I mean, I have to think about that actually, whether I feel, it's a very difficult question, whether I felt any kind of inhibition or whether I didn't. I have to think about it. I usually think that sometimes one has to leave the imagination a little bit free of the reader to be able to construct certain scenes. But on the other, I sort of understand where you're coming from. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, I have to think about that. I'll think about it a little bit more, but it's an interesting point. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, now we have Arwa and then Omneya.
Good evening. I just have a response regarding Dr. Zaid's comment. I think Dr. Reem managed to somehow convey the sensual side of the love scenes rather than like go into the graphic inappropriate side. That's my opinion. But my question is related to the construction of characters, which I find absolutely fascinating with Dr. Reem, particularly because the last novel I read was Sabil al-Ghara. And what drew me is the choice of names. So my question is, Doctora, do you choose them to serve a particular purpose? Like, for example, the name of Jalila and the character of Jalila, and the character of Sadiq and his name, and the character of Hassan and his name. So I always wonder, is there a purpose there? Like, I don't want to ruin it, but is there like a symbolic purpose behind choosing the names of your characters? Thank you.
If there is, there could be that there is, but it's unconscious. But it did happen intentionally. But it could be that it's very much related. So Sadiq, for example, turns out not to be very honest, and Jalila is very precious in a way. So it could be that this is somehow intentional, but I don't know whether I'm aware of it or whether it just happens to be. Because I remember the same thing with the pistachio seller, with the wafa. That means faithfulness, and she's faithful to her lover until the very end. So is that something that I had in mind when I thought about the name? I'm not sure. I don't know, because I'm in such a state when I write that I don't even distinguish between real and unreal characters anymore. I just, write, and everyone is alive in my mind.
Yeah, I think memory is a big issue. Memory is a big issue because when you're actually writing a few years afterwards, it's very difficult to remember exactly why, and you were reinterpreting what you actually were thinking at the moment.
And I always saw the Freudian side of the personalities that Dr. Reem constructs and creates, and that's why I asked this question, because maybe unconsciously somehow those meanings and names kind of came into being through those characters, maybe.
Thank you, Arwa. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. We have Dr. Omneya, our good friend, has been raising her hand for some time now. Please go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you very much for this precious invitation.
Thank you.
It's just the creme chantilly of the cake made yesterday. I am a member of the ambassador workshop, and we usually make a very a fruitful cake every Friday. And usually he invites us to a very, very nice decoration party with a very precious members and figures on Saturday that I really appreciate. Reem, I like so much your writing.
Thank you.
And I'm so impressed about focusing on identity, which is a crucial issue for every female, whether hibernating inside our Arabic world or re-innovating herself from abroad, from the States or any other part of the world. It's a consistent issue, pulsating in every heart of every woman all the time. And I asked you two questions through the ambassador. I passed them through message, but I think he wants us to interact with you more. And it was about identity. I ask you how to re-innovate your identity in such harassing world in Middle East and in Egypt and in the Arab world, how to re-innovate our identity. And I asked the question, and I'm still searching for the answer, and I hope you have a nice answer for that, and we can propagate it from this point. The other point that, are you noticing that most of, I read 2 novels of yours. One was The Love, according to the Arab, الحب على الطريقة العربية, where the other is أولاد الناس. And I figured that you are always touching the heart of teens. Did you notice that? I think the best readers for you are going to be the teenagers, because I'm in 50s. And when I read, I just remember myself when I'm 15 years old girl.
That's wonderful.
This wonder. So you transform me through time. And this is the best thing I like when reading your novels. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Umnaya. If you allow me to say Umnaya, and please call me Reem
sure.
as well. I tried to make my daughter read my work, but she missed a lot of what was being said. So I think the teens find it a little bit, as perhaps Muhammad was saying, there is a bit more torture and some ruthless elements that they don't necessarily enjoy. But I guess it's for, it would be good if they do read, especially the historical fiction, because I think it is very important. But I think it's more like we feel like teens again when we read is a very useful thing to happen to us, I guess. It's a very challenging time for all human beings when they think about their identity, Umnaya, and I agree with you. With everything that is happening in the world, we keep rethinking about our identity. It's a very, it's a time of, unfortunately, a rise of racism and the rise of fascist, ideas. It's not necessarily the best times. There are lots of issues that we thought about as in the world that they are not necessarily, people will not negotiate about them anymore, like discrimination and things like that, that now are being challenged once more as if we went back 100 years. And so it's a very tough time to live in. And especially if you're a woman, because if you're a woman, there is also the burden of having a little bit more vulnerability. Unfortunately, still the case, where men still have more access, as we said, equal access. They have much more access to resources than women. In my last book, Arabic Sociolinguistics, we said the 3 W's: white, was it 3 W's, or wealthy, and I don't remember the last one, but it had to do with being male and being white and being wealthy. Then you get your way easier than if you are, of a darker color, or if you are female, or if you are from not necessarily very wealthy, then you don't necessarily have a voice. People do not hear you very much. So I think that's unfortunate, and this is our role as writers, and and even just human beings, to make our voice much more heard, and to try to make a difference in this kind of unequal world where we live, in my opinion. I have to look for the 3. I'll send you the 3 W's that I wrote in my book. Just I'm trying to remember.
Thank you for that.
Another question, please. Because yesterday we had a very challenging text about Ernest Hemingway, The Killers. And I was just asking, the wonderful book you wrote lately, أولاد الناس, can you summarize all these big dialogues in 10 pages as he did in The Killers? This is my second question.
I usually don't touch my writing once I finish. I don't even read it anymore. It's it's out of me. So it goes to, it's like a mature child that goes out in the world. So I don't usually go back and look even at it unless I have to. But I might want to go and look at it again.
Hey, this is a diplomatic answer. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Asmahan, and looking at the time, this may be the last question or comment.
Yes, I thought Professor Reem didn't remember me. I had interview with her when I was a journalist in Al Garida Al Kuwaitiyya, and she gently sent her books to me, but I never had taken them because my colleagues had taken them. I read her novel, Dr. Hana. The one interesting for me, the gap. It is a gap between us and ancient or previous people. And how could you interpret this gap or expressing the feeling of people who was big time between us and them. It is difficult even to me to read the private letter from Arabic period, and difficult to me to understand the mind and the psychology of these people. And it is difficult to to express it in writing. And that is my question. Thanks a lot.
I totally understand that it needed a lot of courage. And at the beginning, I was very kind of dependent. So I had a colleague of mine at AUC who was specialized in the Mamluk period. And whenever I got a problem about, for example, little details, how did they sit, or how did they eat, or what kind of drinks did they have, I would actually send her a message, even at 1 o'clock in the morning, ask a question. At the end, she said to me, Reem, just, they are just human beings like us, just write about them. Don't feel inhibited because they live in a different times. And I think her sentence somehow made me go back and read the poetry of the times, read the books, and find that they are very similar. We tend to think that people were very different. We also tend to think people were not as mature and not as broad-minded as we are, but unfortunately, sometimes, unfortunately, they are actually more broad-minded and more liberal than some of us now. So I think that was something for me to learn, that people could be very sophisticated in their emotions. They could be very intelligent in the way that they look at things. They could be very good in what they are doing, and it's not like we are living in the best age. No, that's not. Again, this is something I learned when I am a bit older.
I don't think many people will argue that we're living in the best age nowadays, but yeah, it's a good point to remind us. It's a good thing to keep reminding us of. Okay, comments, questions?
Could I just ask Reem, please, to talk a little bit more about this idea of us being a class society with class distinctions, and how you incorporate that into your latest novel, Sabil al-Gharq? Because,
sure.
Yeah.
Hoda, did you read Ashya or not yet?
Which one?
Ashya.
No, I haven't.
Okay, I would love to know your opinion about that one.
I will actually. Last time we were together, I wanted to buy it, but we were moving around. But so tell me more about, because that's a point of interest for me too. The idea of us being, our society being, putting a lot of distinction. We are almost going like the caste system of India. We have such very strong class distinctions, which you, having lived abroad, probably felt how strong it is, that they have classes, but there's not that kind of distinction. The States, for example. So tell me more about it, because that's part of your field of interest.
So I can tell you, Hoda, I can give you 1 or 2 examples of things that I personally would think is politically incorrect, that people sometimes would say normally, as if it's a kind of normal situation, while for me it's very shocking and very politically incorrect. So I remember, for example, I was sitting with a professor and professor of medicine, and the professor, he was telling me that I was asking about the students of medicine in Cairo University, and then the professor was telling me that he thinks the students are intelligent, but unfortunately they all come from lower social classes, so it's very difficult for them to understand. So things like that. And it was,
yeah, that is
exactly. So I was very shocked. It's very shocking when it comes from a professor as well. But you realize, of course, that linguistics is very important, because this would be completely politically incorrect in the US, and it could be very dangerous to say such a thing as a professor. But in Egypt, it's very normal, by the way.
The bad thing, the people this talk is directed to, they will agree. They
yes,
would,
yes,
unfortunately,
yes,
they would agree, yeah, we come from a lower class, but we're good, you know, with the but we're good.
I think we need, I would very much want to know your opinion about Ash-Shara'a, because it deals with this issue. Yeah, and of course, Sabil Gharak dealt with it, but it was kind of 150 years earlier. Yeah, so it was much more, sure, in a different way.
But in the discussion, I did sense people were getting sort of shocked. It's like it doesn't happen, you know. We wouldn't approve of that. Same difference right now in our society right now.
No, it does happen. It does happen. Like there is a scene sure, there is a scene in Ash-Shara'a, Wonderful Things, a scene that happens in Egypt every single year. You know, there is this, I don't know whether you remember, Muhammad and Amani, the scene in which the woman coming from Delta, the Fallaha, goes to Marina. And she sits on the seaside, and then someone, another woman who thinks that it's not appropriate for her to sit there, decides to kick her out. No, just to kick her out, and says, you're renting an apartment here, you're not a resident, just get out. And then, I mean, we think about this scene and we read it and we think, oh, that's horrible. But it happens every single year in Egypt. Every single year you hear about people being kicked out of beaches because they just don't
swimming
look,
suits, yeah, exactly. Because of the swimming suit.
Yeah, or they just don't look, you know, the right kind of people.
But Ash-Shara'a, Wonderful Things was before that, right? So
it was 2010.
It was before that. No, before you wrote it before the event, before the Sahel al-Shamali event.
Yeah, but I think it will be an event that will continue to happen, unfortunately, in our community.
Thank you. I think at this note we can end our conversation today. The point of writing and the point of having these discussions is not just to expose the problems that we're facing in the world, but to highlight the role that writing has in dealing with these problems and confronting them and giving courage to people who are involved in trying to make things a little bit better. I think I'd like to thank you all for coming. My dear friend Reem Bassiouney, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
And this is a conversation that I've enjoyed so much, and I think I've learned quite a few things. Reem, you have the
floor. I enjoyed it very much. I really very much want to see you all. And Amani and Muhammad, I very much wanted to see you, as you well know. I know that Corona made it very difficult for us to meet, and for all of us to meet, basically. But I'm so glad that we found another way, and perhaps we should do this more often. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be with you today.
Thank you very much. Goodbye, and we'll see you next time. Thank you all.